Good afternoon. Welcome to the podcast of Open Europe. I'm Pieter Cleppe from Open Europe in Brussels, and here next to me I'm very pleased to have Professor Dr. Hans-Werner Sinn, probably one of Germany's most prominent economists, if not the most important. Professor, what is your take on what happened in Cyprus?
Well, it's a catastrophe for the banking sector. This was long prepared, in a sense, by these excessive credit operations, many times larger than the GDP of the country. And now in the crisis, all these problems show up. The banking sector in Cyprus is more or less bankrupt, and the state is not in a much better shape. So what can we say? If you mean the decisions of the ECB and the EU, I think they did a reasonably good job in finding a compromise between various goals. And I find it quite remarkable that they openly address now the problem: who has to bear the write-off losses if a state and a bank borrow too much? Then someone has to bear the losses. Should it be the taxpayers of other states? Should it be the creditors? I think it should be the creditors. They took the investment decision, and also they have the wealth, by definition, to bear the write-off losses. Since we will have many cases of that sort, many bankruptcies of banks in Europe in the years to come, it is very useful to have a pattern for it. And Dijsselbloem, I think, was very outspoken in saying this will be the pattern for the future. I think it is right. So we have a bail-in rather than a bail-out only. There's still a lot of taxpayer money involved, and that is good. So that the investors in the future know what they are doing if they bring their money to a particular bank or country. Cyprus was paying high rates of interest on deposits, unusually high rates of interest, and so it is quite normal that the depositors bear the risk.
Is this a reflection of Germany more and more saying, here is our limit?
Yes, indeed. I think the change in the attitude was provoked by the decision of the EU in last June to recapitalize the banks, if necessary, with the ESM money. That decision, taken late in the night, seemed to be, for many, the solution. The creditors and the debtors had a problem with one another, and now there seemed to be a possibility to use the taxpayer money of other countries for it. It seemed a relief for those investors who were afraid of not getting their money back. But what they did not take into account that the left in Europe, and in particular also the German left, is very nervous about this. As much as they endorsed rescuing countries who are in trouble, they are not willing to accept rescuing creditors of banks, let alone Russian oligarchs. And this has implied the turnaround in the German public mood. And the German government now had to react, because if they would have brought a kind of solution like in Ireland to the parliament would not have accepted it, because the opposition would strictly be against it, and their own majority for such a delicate decision is not there. So the German government had to come up with a different solution.
Can we expect more capital flight now as a result of this decision from the south of Europe?
No, well, I think we have to be careful with the term capital flight. But it is right that the decision is a warning signal for investors. Be careful, watch carefully where you invest your money, and this implies that those banks that wish to borrow over their limits will have to pay higher rates of interest, which makes it less attractive for them to borrow. And I think this is perfectly right. This is what we need. The capital market can only function if the investors are uncertain about whether they get their money back. I mean, if the real uncertainty which is there is borne by them rather than taken away by some intergovernmental insurance activity, that would lead to a misallocation of scarce capital among the banks of Europe.
Okay. What about Italy then? Do you think it's possible for Italy to do the necessary reforms to restore competitiveness with Germany?
It's possible, but whether it's politically possible, I mean, it's economic. In economic terms, it's possible. Whether it's politically possible, no one knows. I mean, the Italian policy situation is a deadlock because there are two chambers with equal right, and they are blocking one another. So that I do not know. No one knows that.
What if it doesn't work? Do you think it's possible that a country leaves the euro then?
Of course, it is possible that countries leave the euro. I have long advised Greece to leave the euro because their path towards competitiveness through cuts in wages and prices is so long that if you try it, then you put too much pressure on the labor market and the domestic population. People can't stand such enormous austerity programs, and it would be a disaster, I think. For the country, it would be much, much better if they exited and devalued their currency. Then that would rather quickly regain competitiveness for Greece. The Greek would therefore begin to buy their own products rather than importing tomatoes from the Netherlands. They could buy their own ones, or other agricultural products from France they could buy at home from their farmers. So that would be, in my opinion, the least problematic way to recovery. I don't say that it is without problems. We have, for a country like Greece, three choices to become competitive. I mean, we should know they increased their prices too much in the past when the euro brought cheap credit, as so many others did. The countries of the south are sitting there with excessively high prices, which deprive them of their market in Europe. Now they have to cut their prices, become cheaper, and one possibility is to cut the prices in the Eurozone, but that is hardly possible. You can do it with austerity. You can squeeze a country to the brink of a civil war, and the prices will not be cut sufficiently. So that is hardly possible. The other possibility is you inflate the core countries like Germany, but you would have to inflate them a bit. Greece's prices would have to come down 30% against the average, while Germany becomes 20% more expensive. That means that Germany would have to inflate 10 years by 5.5% per year to make Greece in the end competitive. I don't think that the Germans are easily willing to do that. So if that is not happening, then Greece will stay in this terrible situation in the labor market. The youth unemployment rate will approach 60%. The overall unemployment rate is already approaching 30%. So how can that be sustained? I think it's a catastrophe in the euro. And for the population of Greece, there's only one possibility, namely exiting as quickly as possible and to become competitive. And I would say they should have a return ticket. They should be able to return to the euro at a depreciated exchange rate at a later point in time if they satisfy the entry conditions. That would give the population hope. It would not be expulsion out of the Eurozone. They could even legally be part of the system. They would be in a sort of hospital for a while, and then they would return to normal. This is the right strategy. It is not without problem, because before that, when you begin discussing that and have the parliament making a vote, there would be a capital flight of the kind which we now observe in Cyprus. So exactly the same problems as we observe in Cyprus would be occurring before you exit. But once you have exited, it's fine. Then the drachma is low, there's no capital flight any longer. To the contrary, the capital which rich Greek people have brought to Switzerland, say, one speaks of 120 billion euros, will readily appear on the market in Greece. They will buy cheap real estate, they will buy factories, they will reinvest in the country, and this is one of the driving forces for the new recovery.
All right, one last question. People say it's only fair that German taxpayers put up billions and billions because Germany has been the big winner of the euro. That's what people say, always referring to the German exporting sector. What do you think of that? Is it true?
No, it's not true. They forget what has happened under the euro. When the euro was announced 1995 at the Madrid summit, we got this enormous capital export from Germany to the southern periphery, often via France. French banks distributed the German savings in southern Europe. And there was very little investment in Germany. In Germany, the unemployment rate was rising. Germany had the lowest growth rate for years of all European countries. Germany had the lowest net investment share of all OECD countries for a while. So there was really a eurocrisis in Germany. This eurocrisis, with increasing unemployment, forced the Schröder government 10 years ago to carry out very painful reforms, depriving millions of Germans of their social entitlements, reducing the lower wages, creating gradually then over time jobs, and that led to the recovery. But in overall terms, from 1995 to Lehman, Germany fell in the ranking of GDP per capita from the 2nd place to the 8th place among those countries which are now in the euro. And how can you say that such a performance is showing particular profits of Germany? Of course there were the export surpluses, but what they do not understand, those people who argue that way, is that an export surplus by definition is a capital export, and in this particular phase of history was even caused by it, because the capital was leaving the country. There was a slump in Germany. The slump meant the incomes did not rise very much, so the imports stayed below, and because the imports stayed behind, Germany had a current account surplus. Also, the mass unemployment implied that the German wages did not increase very much, and the export competitiveness also increased a little. This is the law of capitalism. If capital goes from A to B in space, then A goes into a slump, has a current account surplus, and B goes into a boom and has a current account deficit. So arguing that if you have a current account surplus, this is a sign of a particular profit is really absurd.